When you wake up in the morning, before the weight of the world lands on your shoulders, you need to remind yourself that God's supply has never been measured by human limitations. What you see, what you feel, what you think you lack, none of that defines the true resources available to you. God has a way of stepping into empty places and filling them with something so abundant that it overwhelms your understanding. He is not a God of just enough to get by. He is a God of more than enough, enough to sustain you, strengthen you, and overflow into every corner of your life. When you think about God's provision, you cannot think with a survival mentality. You must shift from seeing yourself as someone barely making it to someone connected to an unlimited source. There are moments in life where you look at your circumstances and immediately feel the sting of insufficiency. Maybe you don't have enough money to cover your bills. Maybe you don't have enough peace to quiet your anxiety. Maybe you don't have enough strength to face another day of pressure. And yet, in the middle of those moments, God whispers softly but firmly, I have more than enough for you. His supply does not depend on how full your bank account is, how stable your emotions are, or how strong your body feels. His supply flows from his nature. He is abundant by identity, generous by character, and overflowing by design. Nothing in him runs dry. When you study the stories of Scripture, you see a pattern woven through every miracle. God doesn't simply provide what people expect. He exceeds it. When the widow had only a little oil left, God didn't give her a single jar. He multiplied it so much that every container she could find was filled. When thousands of hungry people were sitting in the wilderness with only a few loaves and fish, God didn't ration the bread. He multiplied it until baskets were left over. That is his nature. When he steps into your situation, he doesn't match the size of your need. He surpasses it with the size of his power. Sometimes you limit God because you think in terms of your resources instead of his. You look at what's in your hand and assume that's all there is. But God's supply is not based on what you possess. It's based on who he is. As long as you remain connected to him, you are connected to an endless flow of provision. The strength you need for today is available. The wisdom you've been praying for is available. The breakthrough you've been waiting for is available, not in small portions, not in limited doses, but in overflowing abundance. God is never intimidated by your needs. He's not wringing his hands in heaven trying to figure out how to meet your demands. Before you even recognize the need, he has already prepared the supply. Before the problem shows up, the solution is already in motion. You are never one moment away from being emptied because you are under the care of a God whose hands are full. All you have to do is trust him enough to believe that what he has for you is greater than what you can see. When you step into your day with that faith, you walk differently, you breathe differently, you expect differently, because you know God has more than enough for you. There are times in life when the pressure becomes so heavy that you begin to identify yourself by what you lack. You start carrying the weight of your disappointments like a name tag. You start looking at your empty places as if they define your destiny. But lack is not your identity. Scarcity is not the label God placed on your life. Just because you've been through seasons where resources were tight, doors were closed, and answers seem distant does not mean you are meant to live your life in that condition. Those moments are experiences, not identities. They are chapters, not your entire story. You cannot let temporary seasons of struggle convince you that you are permanently limited. Scarcity tries to shape the way you think. It whispers that you will always be behind, always be short, always be overlooked. It tries to convince you that you must shrink your dreams to match your situation. But scarcity is a liar. It does not have the authority to define you. It may speak loud, but it is not the final voice over your life. When you belong to a God who multiplies, who restores, who rebuilds, and who resurrects, you cannot allow the language of lack to settle in your spirit. You may have walked through seasons of emptiness, but emptiness is not who you are. You may have faced moments where you didn't have enough strength or enough support, but that does not mean you were created to live without abundance. You must understand that every season of scarcity in Scripture was an opportunity for God to reveal His supernatural supply. When the widow ran out of flour, God wasn't exposing her poverty. He was preparing her overflow. When the disciples told Jesus there wasn't enough food to feed the crowd, they weren't describing defeat. They were setting the stage for multiplication. When the wine ran out at the wedding, it wasn't the end of celebration. It was the birthplace of a miracle. Scarcity is not a verdict. It is an invitation for God's abundance to show up. But if you start believing scarcity is your identity, you will not leave room for God to step in with more than enough. Your identity must be rooted in who God says you are, not what your circumstances say you lack. You are not defined by the job you lost, the money you don't have, the support you never received, or the opportunities that slipped away. You are defined by a God who calls you chosen, blessed, favored, equipped, and supplied. You must lift your expectation higher than your situation. Even when your hands feel empty, your life is still connected to an unlimited source. Even when your heart feels tired, God still has strength for you. Even when your mind feels overwhelmed, God still has clarity for you. The presence of lack does not mean the absence of provision. It simply means something greater is coming. Scarcity tries to press itself into your identity so that you live from a place of fear instead of faith. But you must refuse to let it brand your spirit. You must refuse to let it shape your mindset. Stand in the truth that you are not a product of what you lack. You are a product of who your Creator is, and your Creator operates in abundance. Live with that confidence. Walk with that assurance. And remind yourself every single day, scarcity may surround you for a moment, but it will never define you. When you look through the pages of Scripture, you begin to notice a pattern. God does not wait for perfect conditions to reveal His power. He steps into insufficiency, into lack, into moments where resources are stretched thin, and He turns them into testimonies of overflow. God has a way of taking something small, something insignificant in human eyes, and breathing on it until it becomes more than enough. He specializes in miracles that do not simply meet the need, but exceed it. And every time he performs a miracle, he sends the same message: I am not limited by what you have. I am only limited by what you believe. Overflow begins where your ability ends. When the widow approached the prophet with nothing but a little oil, she wasn't presenting abundance, she was presenting emptiness. She was presenting a situation that looked hopeless. But God doesn't need a full table to create a feast. He just needs a seed. That little drop of oil, that small remnant she thought was worthless, became the raw material for an overflow so great that every jar in her house was filled to the brim. God didn't give her just enough to stop the crisis. He gave her enough to live, enough to sell, enough to sustain her future. That is what overflow looks like. God taking the small and stretching it until it becomes supernatural. The same pattern appears when Jesus feeds the 5,000. The disciples looked at the crowd and saw a problem. They counted the loaves and saw scarcity. They counted the fish and saw impossibility. They looked at the situation through the lens of logic. But Jesus looked at the same handful of bread and saw potential. He saw raw material for a miracle. He saw an opportunity to reveal that heaven is not intimidated by large needs. And when he lifted that small offering to God, multiplication began. The bread didn't stretch because of human strategy. It stretched because of divine touch. It fed every person present, and when the crowd was done, baskets of leftovers overflowed. God didn't just feed the multitude. He proved that his supply will always surpass the demand. Overflow shows up again at the wedding in Cana. What started as a celebration turned into a crisis when the wine ran out. Running out didn't mean failure. It meant God was about to introduce a miracle. Jesus didn't refill the wine halfway, and he didn't produce a cheap substitute. He filled the jars to the top. He improved the quality. He created more than the moment required. Whenever God shows up, he increases both quantity and quality. Overflow means God doesn't restore you to where you were. He lifts you to where you've never been. God doesn't perform overflow miracles because he's showing off. He does it because he wants you to understand who he is. He wants you to see that lack cannot stop him, numbers cannot restrict him, and emptiness cannot limit him. He moves in abundance because abundance is his nature. And if you walk with him long enough, you begin to realize that your little isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of his multiplication. You stop worrying about what's in your hand and start trusting what's in his. Overflow becomes possible when you recognize that God specializes in turning not enough into more than enough. Before the world begins to pull on you, before the noise, the pressure, the deadlines, and the responsibilities begin demanding your attention, there is a moment in the morning when heaven leans toward you and whispers, you are not stepping into this day alone. From the moment your eyes open, God has already positioned provision around you. You may not see it yet. You may not feel it yet, but his supply is already in motion. Morning is not just the start of a new day. It is the unveiling of fresh strength, fresh mercy, and fresh grace. What you need for today is already waiting for you in God's presence. You are not waking up to scarcity. You are waking up to divine support. Many people start their day feeling overwhelmed, carrying yesterday's worries, tomorrow's fears, and today's responsibilities all at once. But that is not how God intends for you to walk into your morning. He invites you to start the day anchored, not anxious, covered, not exposed, supplied, not struggling. Before your feet even touch the ground, heaven has dispatched what you need. Strength is already being poured into your spirit. Peace is already settling into your mind. Wisdom is already aligning your decisions. God prepares your day the way a shepherd prepares a pasture. Before the sheep arrive, the provision is already spread out. You must understand that God does not wait for you to encounter a problem before He prepares the solution. He is proactive, not reactive. He goes ahead of you. He knows the challenges you will face today, the conversations you will have, the temptations that may come, the obstacles that may arise, and He equips you in advance. Even the battles you haven't experienced yet have already been accounted for. Even the needs you have not voiced yet have already been supplied. God's provision enters your morning before your worry ever has a chance to rise. Think about the way the Israelites woke up each morning in the wilderness. They didn't have to hunt for food or scramble for survival. When they stepped outside their tents, manna was already on the ground. Heaven had delivered their provision before they even realized they were hungry. And every morning, without fail, God supplied exactly what they needed for that day. In the same way, your morning is covered in unseen blessings, strength you didn't know you had, protection you didn't realize was around you, favor that will go before you, and grace that will carry you. Your morning is already prepared. Sometimes you walk into the day feeling empty, as though you're starting at a deficit, but that is because you are measuring your capacity by how you feel rather than by what God has provided. Your feelings fluctuate, but God's provision remains steady. The pressure may rise, but His strength rises with it. The uncertainty may grow, but His guidance grows with it. What He gives you in the morning is not fragile or temporary. It is enough to handle everything that will come your way. God doesn't prepare you halfway. He doesn't send you out unarmed. He equips you fully, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and even physically. When you understand this, your mornings shift. You no longer drag yourself into the day. You step into it with authority. You no longer expect defeat. You expect supply. You no longer brace for chaos. You anticipate God's hand moving through every task, every conversation, every step. You walk into the day knowing that you are supported by a strength greater than your own. You walk into the day confident because heaven has already been here before you woke up. And when God prepares your morning, you don't move from emptiness, you move from fullness. Every area of your life, every battle you face, every need you carry, every weakness you feel, every assignment placed in your hands has already been met with God's overflowing supply. There is no part of your journey that God overlooks. There is no corner of your life that He has left uncovered. He does not choose which areas to bless and which areas to ignore. His provision is whole, complete, and perfectly tailored to the demands of your day and the destiny on your life. The very thing you think you lack is the very thing God has already made abundant. You may not see the fullness of it yet, but heaven is never late in preparing what you need. When you step into a challenge, God has already matched it with strength. Before the weight of the responsibility reaches your shoulders, He has already placed endurance in your spirit. Before the conflict rises, He has already planted peace in your heart. Before discouragement tries to break you, He has already wrapped you in encouragement. God doesn't wait for life to overwhelm you before He decides whether or not to help you. He prepares the answer before the question ever forms. He equips you in advance, not in response. That is why nothing catches Him off guard, not the hardship, not the obstacles, not the unexpected shifts. He has already deposited what you will need to get through it. You must recognize that God's more than enough is not limited to physical provision. It stretches into emotional strength, mental clarity, spiritual authority, and relational wisdom. When your heart feels tired, God has more than enough comfort to renew it. When your mind feels cluttered, He has more than enough peace to settle it. When your motivation feels weak, He has more than enough fire to ignite you again. There is no emotional battle or internal struggle too deep for His supply. He knows how to touch every hidden place and fill every empty space. Every part of who you are is under the canopy of His abundance. Even in your assignments, your calling, your responsibilities, your purpose, God provides more than enough grace to carry them. Sometimes you may look at your life and feel unqualified or unequipped for what you're called to do. You may feel too small for the role or too stretched for the burden, but God doesn't give you purpose and leave you powerless. He matches every calling with capacity. He aligns every assignment with ability. He gives you more than enough strength, wisdom, and courage to fulfill what He placed in your hands. Your assignment may be great, but God's supply is greater. There are seasons when your battles feel fierce. You may be fighting in areas you never expected. Your health, your relationships, your finances, your faith. But even those battles are not bigger than God's ability to sustain you. He gives you more than enough to stand when you want to fall, more than enough resilience to endure when life tries to break you, more than enough protection when the enemy attacks, more than enough assurance when your doubts rise. His provision is not just about giving you victory, it's about giving you the strength to walk through the fight without losing who you are. Every part of your life is covered. Every challenge is already accounted for. Every need is already supplied. When God gives more than enough, it means you will not face a single moment today without having something from heaven to empower you. You do not have to fear lack in any area of your life. God's abundance is not partial, it is complete. And His supply is not fragile, it is overflowing. When you begin to understand the character of God, you stop expecting Him to operate on the level of just enough. And you start recognizing that He is a God of overflow. He does not do the bare minimum. He does not give you scraps. He does not hand you blessings that barely sustain you. When God pours into your life, He pours with intention, with abundance, and with power that surpasses your expectations. Expecting overflow is not arrogance. It is alignment. It means you are beginning to see God the way He reveals Himself generous, limitless, and overflowing with goodness. When he moves, he doesn't simply meet the need, he exceeds it in ways that only heaven can explain. Too many people approach their day expect to survive instead of expecting to flourish. They brace for stress instead of anticipating grace. They wait for problems instead of watching for provision. But heaven invites you to shift your expectation. When you expect God's more than enough, you position your heart to receive what he is already prepared to give. Expectation is faith in motion. It means you are no longer looking at life through the lens of fear, but through the eyes of possibility. You understand that God does not bless halfway, and you stop living with a halfway mindset. You start walking into situations believing that something good is going to meet you there. When God blesses, he blesses in overflow because he is trying to do more than answer your prayer. He is trying to change your mindset. He wants you to know that his supply is not limited. When he filled the widow's jars, he didn't leave them half full. When he fed the 5,000, he didn't stop. When the hunger ended, he kept multiplying until there were baskets left over. When he turned water into wine, he didn't create something ordinary. He created the best wine of the night. Every miracle is a message God gives more than the moment requires. Overflow is his signature. Expecting overflow does not mean you will never face challenges. It means you know challenges cannot cancel what God is doing. It means that even when you walk into a hard season, you believe that God's abundance is still working behind the scenes. You begin to look at closed doors differently because you know a better one is opening. You face disappointment differently because you know God is preparing something you cannot see yet. You weather storms differently because you know they cannot stop the blessing that has already been assigned to you. Overflow changes how you endure. When you raise your faith to the level of expecting overflow, you stop shrinking your dreams to match your circumstances. You stop lowering your prayers to match your comfort zone. You stop assuming that what you see is all there is. You begin to dream bigger, pray bolder, and walk stronger because you know heaven is backing you. Overflow is not about luxury. It's about confidence. It's about knowing that God will always supply more strength than the battle requires, more peace than the storm demands, more wisdom than the decision needs. He supplies according to his riches, not according to your limits. Every time you expect abundance, you open the door for God to prove himself faithful. Expectation pulls the blessing into your life. Expectation activates what God has already spoken over you. Expectation turns your morning into a runway for miracles. When you anticipate overflow, you no longer walk into your day empty. You walk in prepared, empowered, and confident because deep down you know when God pours, he pours until it overflows.